In the blood-soaked chronicles of Roman imperial history, few stories expose the terrifying depths of cruelty and unchecked power like that of Sporus, a beautiful young boy whose tragic fate became intertwined with one of history's most notorious tyrants, Emperor Nero. This is not merely a tale of politics or conquest. This is a harrowing examination of how absolute power can strip away a person's very identity, turning life itself into a grotesque theater of imperial obsession. It was 65 AD. The Roman Empire stretched across continents, its banners flying from the wild coasts of Britain to the distant banks of the Euphrates. Rome stood as the master of the world, its power seemingly limitless under the rule of Nero, Claudius, Caesar, Augustus Germanicus. Yet, behind the glittering facade of marble and gold, a sinister darkness was taking root, one that would soon devour an innocent life. Nero, still in his late 20s, had already shocked Rome with his decadent lifestyle. Scandalous performances on stage, grandiose building projects, and violent outbursts. Now, rumors of the emperor's growing instability spread like smoke through the streets, and in the center of Nero's world stood his magnificent palace, the Domus Aurea, the Golden House, a monument to his boundless ego. But even within these gilded halls, an unspeakable nightmare was about to unfold. Among the many members of Nero's household was a young freedman named Sporus. Though legally free, Sporus held little true protection. He lived under the shadow of an emperor whose whims were law and whose passions could be lethal. Historical accounts describe Sporus as almost otherworldly in his beauty, delicate, graceful, possessing an ethereal charm that made him stand out even among the pampered elite. But in Rome, beauty could be dangerous, and for Sporus, it would become his curse. The catalyst for his tragedy came with the death of Nero's beloved second wife, Poppaea Sabina. Some claimed Nero had killed her in a violent rage by kicking her during pregnancy. Others blamed complications from childbirth. Whatever the cause, Poppaea's sudden death plunged Nero into a spiraling grief that rapidly curdled into a dangerous obsession. And then Nero saw Sporus. Whether by coincidence or cruel fate, the emperor was struck by the boy's uncanny resemblance to his deceased wife. In Sporus's soft features, Nero saw the ghost of Poppaea and conceived a twisted plan. If death had stolen his beloved, then he would recreate her, no matter the cost. Nero ordered that Sporus be castrated. The mutilation was not only physical, it was the brutal erasure of the boy's very identity. Sporus was stripped of his manhood, his future, and his dignity, all to satisfy the emperor's deranged grief. Behind the palace's pristine walls, imperial physicians carried out the procedure. Sporus's screams, if any, were silenced by cold marble and imperial indifference. But this was only the beginning. Nero announced to the empire that he would marry Sporus, publicly presenting him as the reincarnation of Poppaea. Draped in the late Empress's silks and jewels, Sporus was renamed Sabina and paraded before Rome as Nero's new bride. The wedding was a macabre spectacle. With all the grandeur and ceremony of a royal marriage, Sporus, now dressed in elaborate women's attire, was led through the rituals of Roman matrimony while the court stood in horrified silence. The Senate, aristocracy, and foreign dignitaries watched as Nero declared his devotion to this living doll. What unfolded in the aftermath was perhaps even more disturbing. Sporus was forced to accompany Nero everywhere as his empress. At banquets, at the theater, during public appearances, always playing the part of Poppaea, always under the gaze of a Rome that watched in silent revulsion. Roman citizens, accustomed to the eccentricities of emperors, were deeply unsettled by this spectacle. They saw through the illusion. Behind the glittering robes and jewels was not Poppaea, but a mutilated boy who bore the subtle, chilling marks of surgical violence. To maintain the illusion, Sporus was required to act entirely as a woman, walking, speaking, and behaving as Nero demanded. Any slip, any failure to perfectly embody Poppaea could provoke Nero's violent wrath. Yet, at times, Nero lavished him with gifts and affection, creating a devastating cycle of reward and punishment. Behind the public spectacle lay a private prison of unimaginable psychological torment. Sporus was not simply pretending to be someone else. He was forced to become someone else. Every aspect of his self was systematically erased, replaced with Nero's obsessive vision. This was identity theft on a horrifying scale, not of name or title, but of existence itself. Even as Sporus endured this cruel existence, the empire around him teetered on the edge of collapse. Nero's reign became increasingly erratic. The Senate, military commanders, and even his personal guard began to turn against him. By 68 AD, rebellion ignited across the empire. Facing universal rejection, Nero fled Rome with only a few loyal supporters, Sporus among them. The young man, who had never chosen any part of this nightmare, now found himself fleeing alongside his tormentor as the empire disintegrated. Nero's final days were filled with delusional fantasies and desperate schemes, but eventually, cornered and betrayed, he chose suicide over capture. Even in death, Sporus remained trapped. After Nero's suicide, Sporus was not freed. Instead, he became a morbid trophy, passed from one powerful man to another during the chaotic Year of the Four Emperors. First claimed by Emperor Galba, Sporus lived in luxurious captivity, still partially performing his forced role. Then he was handed to Otho, who reportedly treated him with some degree of gentleness. But Otho's rule was short-lived, and soon Vitellius seized power, ushering in the final, most degrading chapter of Sporus's life. Vitellius devised a public spectacle so obscene that even Rome, in all its decadence, shuddered. He planned to force Sporus into the arena to reenact the rape of Persephone, a theatricalized sexual assault staged for public entertainment. After years of mutilation, forced identity, and psychological torture, Sporus faced the prospect of ultimate degradation, being publicly violated before thousands of cheering spectators. At last, confronted with this final horror, Sporus made one final desperate choice. He took his own life. In death, Sporus reclaimed what had been denied to him throughout his suffering, the right to choose his own fate. His suicide was a quiet, tragic act of defiance against a world that had stolen his body, his identity, and his life. Rome hardly mourned his passing. To the empire, he had become nothing more than a footnote in Nero's legacy, a broken doll discarded when no longer amusing. But in truth, Sporus's story remains one of history's most chilling examples of how absolute power can twist love into obsession, grief into cruelty, and life into spectacle. The tragedy of Sporus forces us to confront the darkest corners of human nature. His story is not merely about one man's madness, but about a system that allowed such cruelty to exist. A world where human lives were toys to be bent, reshaped, or destroyed at the whim of an emperor. And yet, within this horror, there lies a spark of resilience. For even after years of forced transformation and degradation, Sporus's final act was not one of submission, but of rebellion. In remembering Sporus, we honor not only his suffering, but his final refusal to be completely broken. His story stands as a haunting reminder of both the monstrous capacities of power and the fragile, unbreakable dignity of the human spirit. If you found Sporus's haunting tale as powerful as I did, consider subscribing for more dark and forgotten stories from history's shadows. Leave a comment. What do you think of Nero's terrifying obsession?